Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. I'm your host, benjaminlee, and I'll welcome aboard the Eastern Express. On this episode, we turn our eyes to the curious meeting between China's President Xi Jinping and Russia's former president turned Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev. Now, it's a get-together that has everyone on the world stage scratching their heads and whispering, so are we good now or what? You see, according to Chinese state media and reports from Reuters, Xi Jinping told Medvedev that Beijing is seeking a political solution to the crisis in Ukraine. A political solution to a war that's been raging for nearly 3 years and causing countless of deaths. Thanks, Beijing. We're right on time. Now, without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Dmitry Medvedev isn't the most obvious candidate for Moscow to send for high-level talks to China. The former Russian president, and now mostly online keyboard warrior hellbent on posting anti-Western social media posts, hasn't really been a huge part of Russia's political life. Yet his character isn't an unknown quality, and his presence in Beijing could hint at where Sino-Russian relations stand.
There is a Chinese idiom, similar sounds resonate with each other, and similar scents blend together, which I believe perfectly explains the sound relationship between our two countries.
China has claimed neutrality in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but you don't see Xi Jinping as cozy with Western leaders at various summits as he is with Vladimir Putin. This coziness goes beyond the handshakes too. Just this year, Russia and China have held several joint military drills. Many Western leaders are aware of how close this relationship is in reality, but this doesn't stop them from trying to persuade China to take a step back.
China has an important role to play in using its influence with the DPRK, North Korea, as well as with Russia, to cease these activities.
Those who see the curtain falling on the war in Ukraine in 2025, given the coming changes to the US administration, indicate that China could have a part to play in this crucial act.
And now, let's take a look at the issue in greater detail. Dmitry Medvedev took his little trip to China as if he were just casually popping over to a neighbor's house to borrow some sugar. Except the sugar in this analogy is strategic guidance, and the neighbor is the world's second largest economy, poised to be a potential kingmaker in a conflict that's tearing Europe apart. Now, one has to wonder what the conversation sounded like. China, of course, has been walking the world's finest tightrope since this invasion kicked off. On one hand, China and Russia have been described as no-limits partners, which is basically diplomatic code for we're really tight, but we'll never say that we're officially together. Now, on the other hand, China's enormous economic interests depend on not becoming the global pariah that Russia seems hell-bent on being. Beijing wants stability, market access, and a semblance of order, like a landlord who doesn't want to evict that one weird tenant who keeps throwing all-night raves, but also can't ignore the noise complaints forever. China's message to Russia seems to be, we like you, we really do, but could you maybe tone it down a notch? We have some very delicate plates spinning over here. Now, from Beijing's perspective, proposing a political solution is a safe, friendly-sounding line. It's like offering everyone a warm cup of tea at a family feud. Come on, let's talk, they say, while chaos rages on in the background. The world is hungry for any glimmer of hope, meanwhile, any olive branch, even if that branch is more metaphorical than any actual policy. But it's also politically savvy. China doesn't want to put all its chips on Russia, nor does it want to see a Western victory so clean that it reduces Beijing's leverage. So playing mediator, or at least playing the role of the friend who says, guys, can we just be cool, positions China as the responsible adult in a room full of shouting children. But is anyone buying it? Well, to Washington and Brussels, this is less let's find peace and more let's not rock the boat that I'm currently building. For Russia, it's a gentle reminder that their big buddy in the East might not always have their back if they keep throwing diplomatic Molotov cocktails. And for Ukraine, it might sound like an empty platitude unless accompanied by real action, like persuading Moscow to, stop invading them. And now, here to share more light on the issue is Çağdaş Ungur, fellow CATS-SWP. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Thank you for having me.
So today we want to unpack a little bit of the Russian-China relationship, but before that, I would like to turn our attention to the 16th package of sanctions that has just been passed. Now, this is the first time that these European sanctions are also targeting countries like China instead of only Russia. Do you think that this is merely an attempt at blocking Russia's capabilities of skirting some of these sanctions, or is it also an acknowledgement of China's at least indirect involvement with Russia's war in Ukraine?
Well, I think that kind of tension has been on the rise for a long while now. And European countries are clearly, they are trying to gather up, and in terms of, they are trying to set up a more united front in these issues. And China has long been, I mean, for over two years now, it has been on the headlines, both in the US and European Union, in terms of how they implicitly or sometimes in a more direct way, they're just supporting Russia, at least on the diplomatic front, maybe not outright in the military field, but clearly China's involvement and support for Russia has been a major headache for these governments. So I think we can see this in terms of a continuity in that respect.
Right, and I think, like you rightfully pointed out, China has been giving Russia a lifeline when it comes to its war efforts in Ukraine. And so now let's unpack a little bit of that. What's China's particular interest in kind of helping Russia throughout this invasion? And do you think that this might change the dynamic between the two countries going forward?
Well, I think, first of all, I don't think China has any interest in terms of seeing Ukraine getting divided or being attacked, invaded by Russia, not per se. But once these things unfolded, they basically made the choice of sticking with Russia because in such a dire geopolitical circumstance, I mean, it's very much black and white in between, U.S., NATO, vis-a-vis Russia and China for a long while now. They basically made the choice, basically declaring that Russia is a much friendlier country. Since the Trump administration, the United States administration had made it a key concern, or basically it's one of the fundamental aims for the US governments is to sort of contain China or minimize its ability for technological progress or military innovation and so forth. So Russia is basically a friend to rely on for China. Of course, Russia is not as strong a player as China is in an economic sense and in a technological field as well. But nevertheless, it's an important country. It's a major regional player, and China, although it doesn't really have any interest in seeing Ukraine divided, carved up, etc., annexed by Russia, because how do we know this? We know from the past experience that China has never been keen on recognizing any of these, so-called puppet states or annexations and outright military invasions of Russia, Crimea, and several others. So China is not really willing to see maps getting changed in any region. A change of that kind of dramatic change to the status quo, but otherwise, yes, diplomatically and otherwise, especially in the economic realm, in bilateral trade and so forth, yes, China did give Russia a particular lifeline, and it has been a very important dimension to this kind of relationship, a relationship of solidarity, partnership.
Right. You mentioned earlier that U.S. has been engaged in what's potentially a trade war with China, with the incoming Trump administration might be tuning that up as well. And we're also seeing the international isolation on the Russia front. Do you think these moves would actually inadvertently push these countries together and create like a stronger bond with each other?
Trump administration, we can definitely expect it to be employing harsher measures on China, like increasing tariffs, especially in certain sectors, from electric vehicles to other particular, like cutting-edge technologies, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and whatnot. There will be more sanctions, higher tariffs, and all kinds of other limitations. Yes, but Trump is also maybe playing the game of divide and rule when it comes to Russia. So we don't really know how the relationship between Trump and Putin governments will unfold. It may actually be a little bit softer in that respect. I mean, Trump administration is seeking a resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. They wouldn't be very much willing to support Ukraine as much as, the Joe Biden government did in the past. So they will be looking for some kind of solution. And we may as well see, for instance, Russia and US softening the tone, minimizing the tension among themselves, and China having the main, brunt of this conflict with the Trump government.
All right. You mentioned earlier as well that China is the stronger economic power between the two, Russia and China. Do you think that pretty much makes Russia kind of playing second fiddle to China in this relationship?
Definitely, I believe the long-term pattern in this relationship, the bilateral relationship, is one that favors China. Economically, we are talking about very different scales, very different outputs in terms of total GDP, in terms of, just the sheer scale of progress China made in the last 40 years or so. Russia never had that kind of economic miracle story. To begin with, and if you look at the technological domain, space technologies, artificial intelligence, again, quantum computing, wherever you look at, especially renewable energies, of course, and electric cars, batteries, and whatnot, China has made an enormous progress, even by looking at the last 10 years. Main developments in the last 10 years, you see China is making enormous progress in certain respects, which is also why, of course, Trump government or the previous governments in the US has been anxious about China's rise. Russia doesn't really have that. But nevertheless, Russia is, of course, is a different kind of regional player. It's more willing to use physical force on the ground. It is not intimidated by, military sanctions or any other boycotts and, rules and regulations in the regional or international sphere. So it's more of a military power, not like a soft power or an economic, powerhouse. Different roles to be played by each partners here, but nevertheless, again, the war in Ukraine, I believe, will have the result of putting much more pressure on Russia, economically as well as military. It will be exhausted in the end. Clearly, it will not come out of this as a stronger player, but probably as a weaker player. And in the end, China again will, prove itself to be the primary, major power here.
Right, and you mentioned earlier that, well, once the invasion of Ukraine took place, China essentially had to make a choice and eventually landed on the side of Russia due to various reasons. But at the same time, we're also looking at China reluctant to kind of lose its access to the Western market, which is a very large share of its GDP. How has the country been kind of juggling and balancing the relation between sticking with Russia while also not provoking the West to a point where a trade essentially becomes impossible?
Exactly. I mean, that's a very big and important tension for China. And in the financial spectrum, for instance, you could see how Chinese banks and other financial institutions, companies, etc., are being very careful about, triggering U.S. sanctions, and they are very careful in terms of trying to avoid punishments and sticks in that respect. And it has not been a very easy game. In the last 2 years, you don't want to let go of your very good friend here, Russia, but you also cannot be more explicit about your support, especially in the military sense. And financial, there are so many financial sanctions to avoid. And ultimately, the main and I guess the most important objective for the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, is to maintain a sense of stability in the country and, a minimal economic growth. Because as we well know, China is not developing as fast as before, and you need to change the structure of the economy. Given these geopolitical tensions on the global scale, China cannot really rely on exports alone, as it did in the previous 30 or 40 years. You got to change the structure of the domestic economy, and in order to do that, of course, you still don't want to have any kind of black and white tension. Like, you don't want a warlike scenario on the global commercial realm.
Right, so it does seem like a very, very tough balancing act for China going forward. In the meantime, thank you so much for breaking all of this down for us. Really appreciate it, and thanks again for being with us on Eastern Express.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you don't want to miss. According to a new report by Amnesty International, Serbian authorities are deploying advanced digital surveillance tools to monitor journalists and members of civil society. Officials have allegedly used spyware to unlawfully infiltrate mobile devices and collect sensitive information.
In its A Digital Prison report, Amnesty International has detailed how Serbian authorities have been using spyware called Novi Spy and tech developed by Israeli company Celebrite to illegally target reporters and members of civil society. Novi Spy can, according to the report, turn on a phone's camera and microphone remotely and steal sensitive personal data. Celebrite tools can unlock a phone's protections and let them be infested with spyware, enabling data extraction. The report's findings point to an escalation of the crackdown that Serbian authorities have been imposing on freedom of press and on journalists. Some have even called these actions Russian-inspired. Serbia has also seen a string of anti-government protests on a variety of issues, including those in the wake of the 2023 elections, whose participants claimed election fraud.
Russia and North Korea have reopened their regular passenger rail link connecting the two countries. The service had been suspended since 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic first emerged.
The time has come for this not to be the only use of the rail link between North Korea and Russia. Regional customs officials say that Moscow and Pyongyang have resumed regular passenger rail service between Kazan and Tumagang. The first train left the Russian side this Monday. The service was previously suspended at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, although there had been an irregular trial in June 2024 which involved some 1,200 passengers. For the last few years, the railway was used either for trade or for official purposes. It is yet another symbol of the blooming relationship between Russia and North Korea in the wake of the former's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. North Korea has not only been supporting Russia with kind words and handshakes, but also with significant military agreements, which also involve the deployment of North Korean soldiers to the Kursk region, part of which is controlled by Ukrainian forces.
In Belarus, Western symbols of Christmas are now banned from public display. This means that both Santa Claus and his reindeer are prohibited by the Minsk authority.
Sites like these will not only be not seen in Belarus, they'll be frowned upon. Alexander Lukashenko has decided to declare his very own war on Christmas. The Belarusian city of Brest is one where Western Christmas symbols, such as Santa Claus or his reindeer, or even famous songs, will be unwelcome. Instead, they are to be replaced with symbols that will have, to quote the regime's authorities, elements relating to Slavic culture. An example of this is to be someone like the mythical Father Snow and his snow maidens. The Belarusian Ministry of Culture has even gone so far as to create its very own curated playlist of Christmas songs. It includes songs performed by contemporary Russian and Belarusian singers, as well as some Soviet-era ones. Western Christmas music is to be either gone completely or minimized as far as possible.
And that's all on this episode of Eastern Express. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.